This is Joseph Carpenter. Today is the 20th of August, 2024, and I'm interviewing retired Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, JoAnne Bass. This interview is taking place on Zoom. It is sponsored by the UTA Department of History and Geography and is part of the Texas Veterans Project. Chief, thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed today.
Absolutely. Thanks a ton, Joseph, for having me. Very excited to spend some time with you all and appreciate also the work that you guys are doing on behalf of all veterans and sharing our stories.
Thank you so much. It's our pleasure. Where are you from originally, and what can you tell me about your growing up?
Awesome. How much time do we have?
As
Um,
much as you need.
so, so where am I from originally has always been a tough question. I think it probably is for any military child. For me, my home of record is Mililani, Hawaii.
Mm,
But that is primarily because that was where I had the privilege of enlisting into our great Air Force.
mhm.
Um, Before my time in Hawaii and even growing up, I'm an Army brat. My dad served in the United States Army for 24 years. He retired as an Army warrant officer. He actually came to this country as a immigrant while he was 4 years old. Um, went to school, joined the United States Army, got stationed in Korea, and met my mother.
Oh,
And so it was really through his military service that I got a chance to experience what life in the military has been like. And so I tell people that I grew up as a military child and then I joined our Air Force. And so my entire life has been one that where I've been surrounded by our military community and serving in the national defense arena.
yes, that's wonderful. Where is your father from originally?
So he was born in Germany and then, as I mentioned, came to the States and settled down and grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah.
I see. And your mother is,
My mother was from Korea. She was
okay.
born in Busan, Korea,
Mhm.
but she's made America home. And so they both live in Utah now and are enjoying their this chapter in life.
Yeah, I imagine that's great. And where did you go to high school?
So I started off high school in Germany. I actually went to H. Arnold High School in Wiesbaden, Germany.
Mhm.
I was there from my freshman, sophomore, and junior year. And like every military child, after about 3 years, your parents get orders. And so we got orders to Hawaii the summer of my soon to be senior year. And so we moved to Hawaii and so two high schools there.
Okay. And did you participate in any activities in high school?
I did. I probably share more with my children about what an amazing athlete I was, although I'm not quite sure I was amazing. But I did play soccer while I was in Germany, and so I was on the soccer team in high school there. I did play softball growing up as well, but as a military kid, it was kind of tough to be able to stay with those sports, and so between softball and soccer, those are the two things that I primarily participated in.
Right. I can imagine that was a little bit tough. Um, did you attend college prior to joining the Air Force?
I did not. I was supposed to, though. When I was a senior in high school, I started applying to colleges like most kiddos in high school do. And I was actually accepted to the University of Utah, where my mom was still living
Oh,
while we were stationed in Hawaii. And as I was prepping to potentially go and start my freshman year at University of Utah over that summer after I graduated high school, something just kind of occurred to me that I don't know if you're ready for college yet, right? And it's interesting because I knew for certain my dad was not going to pay for college. So as the started coming in before I even went off to college, out of kind of on a whim. I went to the Air Force recruiter
hmm.
and ended up joining the Air Force that summer before I was supposed to go to college, and was in delayed enlistment for a while until I ended up joining the Air Force.
I see. And let me back up just a little bit. What did your father do in the Army? What was his job?
He was an Army personnel officer, a warrant officer. So he worked in what in the Air Force we would call like our MPF, our personnel flight. And so he's a personnel officer for the Army.
I see.
He
And what,
started off enlisted and then went the warrant route.
okay, I see. Was there anyone other than your father who influenced you to join the military?
Um, y- I can't think of a specific person, but I would instead say that, as I mentioned, right, when you're a military kid and you're surrounded by the military community, that's really all you know. And so, having friends who all of their parents were in the military and different branches, by the way, that was probably just that whole environment and culture that I was part of, being on a military base, growing up with a commissary and AFES there, really did seem like a very natural fit to then just join the military. But, my dad always said, and I'll never forget, he would always tell me 4 years in the military never hurt anybody. And
Right.
so that statement alone is really the reason why I joined, because I thought, well, he's not going to pay for college. I'm not sure what I want to do. So let me figure out if this 4 years in the military really never hurt anybody. And then 4 years turned into 31 years.
Wow. So why the Air Force?
Well, after watching him my entire life get up at about 4:30 in the morning and go to PT, I thought I'm not quite Army material because that's way too early for me. And what's very ironic about all of that is as a teenager, I thought, man, I can do 4:30 PT. As an airman, like I got up at 4:30 and 5 and did PT. So anyway, so neither here or there. That was probably one of the main reasons. And, as all the branches of service kind of jab at each other. And I certainly take my jabs on the Air Force. I always thank and appreciate our Army and Marine Corps brothers and sisters because they tend to send their children to the U.S. Air Force. So I think my dad probably also told me which branch I need to join.
I see. Okay. And what was your job in the Air Force?
So when I joined our Air Force in 1993, like every good airman, you're looking at a book of all the possible jobs there are. And remember, Joseph, back then, and since you were prior military, we kind of had to rack and stack what they might be. And for me, I didn't know what I didn't know, and I saw one that was aviation resource management. At the time, it was called operations resource management. And I thought, okay, that seems kind of cool. I can do that. And so it was probably my number 4 or 5 pick. I ended up getting it. So I was an operations resource manager,
Okay.
which turned into aviation resource manager. What that essentially is the person who is the airmen who are there to take care of all of our aviators as well as parachutists. So I learned very quickly, how do you manage the flight and jump records of those who fly and jump for our Air Force?
I see. Okay. And so tell me, what was basic training like for you?
Um, so again, fortunately for me, I had a dad who was in the Army. So to some degree, he was prepping me for basic training, and making sure that I understood that it would be very structured and very disciplined. And so I was already prepared for that aspect of it. But basic training was just that, very structured, very disciplined. Um, Regardless of how much preparation I think anybody can give you, you still go through the motions. And there were certainly times within basic training that I thought I made a big mistake. And University of Utah doesn't sound very bad. And so, it was probably all of the vocal inflections of my military
Right.
training instructors that made me think like that, right? Like back then, they actually yelled a little bit more than they probably do in today's military. And so I'll never forget one of my um, MTIs, who, by the way, was probably like 4'10". But loud voice, right? She had a
Right.
voice of a 10-footer. I remember running up the stairs in basic training, and I remember itching my nose. And then I remember kind of smiling, and, the words she said, because I was smiling, were not very friendly. And then she made me walk around for about a half a day with my hand on my nose, since I couldn't not scratch or itch my nose. So anyway, so there was some aspects of that. What I will tell you is, the other thing that I remember about basic training is that's kind of the first time where you really come together as a team,
Yes.
right? Like, you're with, 30 or 40 or 50 people that you've never met before. They come from all walks of life. And so while you're internally experiencing what I was, which is kind of this, questioning of, did I make the right decision? I'm in an environment that's pretty tough, and they're yelling at me and trying to, force me to have structure, and I'm learning the ways of the military, and man, this sucks. I'm going through the suck 40 or 50 other people,
Yes.
and you're learning how to endure and be stronger and more resilient
Mhm.
in the suck, because you're doing it together. So there's reasoning behind why basic training is what it is, and the
Right.
intent is to weed people out.
Mhm.
And I'm so thankful that while it seemed tough and challenging, because they're trying to understand these people that they get from all walks of life, and do we have the grit and the wherewithal to be somebody who serves in this profession of arms, that I see that all now, but at the time
Yes.
when it was not fun, I don't know that I saw basic training as
It
that.
sounds
And
like
and it was pretty hot. It's in Lackland Air Force Base, Texas.
right. And so what month were you there?
I went in March, so no complaining for me,
Okay.
because it was
Yeah.
not, it wasn't
Not
June
too
and May.
bad. Right.
Yeah,
Right. Could have been July.
for sure.
So what did you do? Where did you go for training after basic training?
So I went to technical training at Keesler Air Force Base.
Hmm.
That's where I did my aviation resource manager training. That was about 7 weeks long. So
Okay.
about 6 or 7, 8 weeks for basic training, and then about 7 weeks at technical training in Biloxi, Mississippi, someplace that I had never been.
Yes.
And Biloxi, Mississippi was hot,
Yes, I imagine. And humid.
humid for sure.
So, what was this experience like for you coming out of tech school there, or excuse me, coming out of basic training? There is uh, a shift because you're used to the structure and the discipline and somebody watching over you all
Yeah.
the time. And then you move into tech school and you've got a little more freedom, and that freedom comes pretty fast. So, what was that experience like for you?
So I will say, you just said it, Joseph. It's almost like you jump off the bus and you scream freedom. Um,
Right.
and it's pretty cool, right? Because again, you're still with this team of different teammates now, of people from who come from all different walks of life.
Mhm.
We've just all finished our perspective of a crucible, and now we're going into technical training. So we've graduated basic training, we're going into technical training. They're expecting us to adult.
Right.
To some degree, it's still structured, because you're still on base, you're still in dorms,
Mhm.
there's still inspections, because they're still indoctrinating you into this thing called training, and also understanding core values, which don't kind of come on with a light switch, but you have freedom. And
Yes.
so now, for the first time, we're able to actually go off base and participate in fun activities on the weekends, if it's our particular phase or whatever that is. And
Yeah.
so appropriately, I'm glad that I had good leaders who shared certain things, like, don't get a tattoo the first Saturday you're, you know, out on the town. Like, that's kind
Right.
of a big deal. And oh, by the way, we all know people who do. Like,
Yes.
I have plenty of tech training friends who got married and got tattoos, and, like,
Yes.
all on the first week.
Right. That's it. That's amazing. And what was your first assignment after tech school?
My first assignment after tech training in June of 1993 was Pope Air Force Base, North Carolina.
Uh-huh.
I'll never forget when I got news that I was going to Pope Air Force Base, North Carolina. I was in tech training and I'd never heard of Pope, again, being an Army brat. And everybody was like, oh no, you're going to No Hope Pope. You're going to Vietnam. Like, you're going to hate it. And I'll be honest, it was the best assignment that I ever had because it goes back to kind of that principle in basic training, right? Like, you're always going to find reasons why a location, could be considered less desirable. But when you're going through that with the people that you serve with, you all determine how great it is. And I had wonderful people that I served with at Pope Air Force Base.
Mhm. You had mentioned, we talked a little bit offline about your accent. Is that where you developed it? At
That
Pope?
is totally where, yeah, as a military brat, I did not have an accent.
Right.
As a young 18-year-old who showed up in North Carolina, it took about 1 year when those sweet Southern women just kind
Mhm.
of took me under their wing. And I'm not kidding you, when it just happened like a light switch, because I'll never forget, it was about a year after I joined the Air Force. I was talking to my parents, and my mom was like, why do you talk like that? And I was like what? And so it's literally stuck with me again, impressionable 18-year-old, but
Right.
but I started appreciating the culture and the experience of being
Mhm.
in the South.
Yes, yes. Um, did you feel adequately prepared for, your first duty station when you
I
got
did. You know, I'll be honest, I did, right? You get a level of general training of what it means to be in the military at basic training. You get a level of job training when you go to your technical training school. And then when you get to your first duty station, you continue that training, and your first supervisor and the trainers above you are the people who are responsible to continue um, that growth pattern. And
Yeah.
so I do feel like I was adequately prepared for the foundational aspects of what was being asked of me.
Mm. And how long were you at Pope?
Oh, I was at Pope Air Force Base from 1993 to 2000. So my first unit there was the 74th Fighter Squadron, flying Tigers when we were F-16. So F-16s were relatively new there.
Mhm.
It was a new kind of model for the Air Force, doing a composite wing, having fighters and mobility aircraft all at the same time. So 74th Fighter Squadron was my first unit. I was there for a few years. And then I PCA'd to the 43rd OSS, where I worked at the flight records section, doing another aspect of my job from kind of duty desk fighter ops, squadron ops, to then taking care of the records of all the aviators and parachutists
Mm.
in the Pope area. And I did that for a while. I did some range scheduling, which was pretty fun because that was the kind of beginning of learning the joint aspects of it by doing some Army range scheduling for our Air Force aircraft.
I see.
And then I ended up taking, this was a pivotal point in my career, in 1997 when I was at Flight Records. We used to take care of these guys who would come to Flight Records in civilian clothes. And we didn't know anything about these folks. We took care of the flight records for their unit, and they came in civvies, and we heard they were kind of like special operations.
Right.
Like, what does that mean to, a young E3 for like me? Like,
Right.
I don't know, but it's fascinating. And man,
Right.
they get to wear civilian clothes. Like, how cool is that?
Yes.
And they approached me one day, and they were holding interviews because we've got a position coming open in our unit, which I don't even know what unit that is, but in our unit, civilian clothes wearing people, would you be interested? And I was like, absolutely. And, I remember at the time, my the other airman in flight records were like, "You're crazy. You don't know what you're going to do. You're going to go behind some fenced, fence line, and we'll never see you again." And but it always intrigued me, the thought of doing something different. And so I was always kind of that airman who volunteered for an opportunity. I ended up interviewing for that job and got selected for it. So that was my first special operations experience with the 24 Special Tactics Squadron. Is I learned what that squadron was.
Right.
And they are really a unit full of some of the best Americans I could have ever served with and served for. They are Americans who we read about in history books, some of which who've paid the ultimate sacrifice for America.
Yes. And so you found out then that they were in fact special operators.
Mhm.
And so were your duties with them similar to what you were doing um, before, or did your duties change?
The duties changed only in that what was pretty fascinating about that assignment was I was the first person that they hired into operations. I was the first female in operations and the first person in that career field really to be hired to set up aviation resource management in that unit. Being a special tactics unit focused on jumpers, they didn't have the level of support that our flying units had. And
Right.
so the opportunity existed where I can start to figure out ways and as an E4 be the subject matter expert to determine what are the currencies and qualifications that parachutists need, combat controllers, PJs, combat weather, TACPs. How do we manage and track those? How do we figure out what the go no goes are for those parachutists to jump? So I was, as a young E4, given a huge responsibility to set up a function within a special tactics unit, and it was game changing. That was also the very first unit where, again, it's a top tier elite unit where I realized that even as a young E4, I had a voice.
Yes.
And I could use that voice. But they were counting on me to be the most credible person that was in my career field. Like they don't know my job, and so as a young E4, I better know every aspect about my job and be resourceful to figure out how I can be the best subject matter expert to this unit.
So at this time, you're probably what, 20 or 21 in that neighborhood. And that's a lot of responsibility for a 20 or a 21-year-old, essentially a kid.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
I
amazing.
agree. I agree. I think that I had amazing parents who, kind of raised me to be ready for that level of responsibility.
But it also says something about the Air Force, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That we put a lot on our airmen, and we expect a lot of them, but we will also give them the tools so that they can succeed.
Hmm. So, and you were there 7 years, if my math is correct, um, from 93 to 2000
At
at
Pope,
Pope,
yeah.
right? That's a long time to be at the same base. Do you think it was because you changed jobs that you were there that much longer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm not privy to back in the 90s kind of the assignment policies and what they had, but I have no doubt that, the PCAing between units from a fighter squadron to and OSS and doing different jobs. And then, my last 3 years or so, for 4 years, I was in the wing. And
Yeah.
then the last 3 years, I was pulled into the special ops arena. That's almost, looked at sometimes as if it's a PCS. But it was really the experiences of the different jobs that helped from a record standpoint make my records look strong and diverse enough that I don't it was a indicator anyway.
So, did you serve at any time overseas? And if so, when did that occur?
I did. So it was the year 2000 when I got orders to Germany. And honestly, Joe, I can't remember if my husband got orders first or if I did. At some point in 1997, I got married to my husband, and it was a very natural fit. He was an 82nd Airborne paratrooper
Okay.
in Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Uh-huh.
And so either he or I got the initial assignment to Germany. And then, the both branches of service will do their best to try to assign you together. And so we were very fortunate that the Army and Air Force could agree, and then off we went to Germany.
Mhm.
So I was very excited. I think I was an E4 at the time, getting orders to Ramstein Air Base. It was a little bit, I remember at that same time being unsure because I'm a newlywed to somebody in a different service. We have orders overseas. Like, how does this work? Because, oh, by the way, your Army posts and Air Force bases are not together. So
Right.
how does this exactly work? So there was a little bit of anxiety, I know, on both of our behalfs, but it all ended up working out. So stationed overseas in Germany at Ramstein from 2000 to 2005.
2005. And so what were your duties at Ramstein?
So at Ramstein, I was initially assigned to the current operations section. Again, I did all things aviation, so I remember being assigned there. And then I did that for a little bit, and then an opportunity came where, again, it always seems to come knocking, where somebody said, "Hey, do you want to work in USAFE AMOC?" which was different from the wing. And the USAFE AMOC at the time, Air Mobility Operations Control Center, like, you never saw those aviation resource managers. So the people in my career field, you never saw them. Like, there were about 4 of them up there, and most people, again, it was very similar to the special ops experience. All of my teammates were like, "Don't go, we'll never see you again." But I raised my hand and I was like, "I'd love an opportunity." And so I was a young E4. I get selected um, for that duty. And then I became a DV airlift scheduler. So my role in the AMOC was to schedule our DVs on our C-21, C-20, or C-9 assets.
Okay.
And that's what I did. It was a fascinating job. It afforded me the opportunity to go to aircraft dispatch school and get an FAA dispatch license. I happened to make E5 there. And then I believe I also made E7 at that time. And when I made tech sergeant, and I was at the USAFE AMOC, I remember telling them I really do need to get back to the wing because I need to start to do my core job. If I'm going to be a good non-commissioned officer, I need to have airmen and I need to do my core job. And that is really in a flight records office.
So E6 tends to be the bump in the road for many E5s, or
Yeah.
staff sergeant to tech sergeant. Did you find that difficult after you made staff to make tech and then to make master sergeant in that 5-year time frame?
Yeah. Well, I actually, let me just correct. I think when I was heading to Germany, I had already made staff sergeant. I
Oh,
just
okay.
didn't pin on. And then I ended up making tech sergeant while I was in that unit. So those were quick. And I made tech sergeant on my first opportunity.
Wow.
Where, to your point, typically making technical sergeant E6 is one of the hardest ranks. So
Mhm.
certainly it was challenging, which is why I think I knew that, if I made tech sergeant on my first opportunity, I need to really get the reps and sets of what it means to be a non-commissioned officer.
Yes, very good. Before you went to Germany, did you receive any sort of cultural training, any language training, anything like that?
I don't know that I did get any of that from the Air Force. I got the standard base intro, that we call it, where for a few days, every airman goes into base intro and get some level of orientation about the local area, about the country. But it was really just that. So a couple days worth, where I had, I think, some advantages was I was a military brat who grew up in Germany at different points. And so I remembered, I had German classes when I was in elementary school. And so all of those things came back to me, and Germany was very much a place that almost felt like home.
So did you ever serve in a combat zone?
I served in combat zones. Certainly, I was part of Operation Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom. In the early 90s, I did a few deployments to Saudi Arabia, to Al Jaber. I was also at Khobar Towers several months before the incident at Khobar Towers. So I have done those deployments and continue to do deployments with our Air Force.
This is more personal, but how did your deployments and then balancing that with your husband's service,
Yeah.
how did that affect your marriage and how did you navigate through those challenges?
That's a great question, Joe. And I'll tell you that, when people ask, were you in a combat zone? The answer is yes, right? But in my position, I support our war fighters, right? Whether that was supporting our aviators or our parachutists. And I did that from, the locations that I was at. And they were relatively shorter periods, right? The longest deployment I ever had was 6 months.
Mm,
But that's very different compared to the deployment experiences that my husband had.
yes.
My husband did 5 1-year tours downrange. Like
Wow.
that in itself, it was hard for me as the airman to say, I'm deployed, 3 months. And,
Yeah.
here's my experience when I'm talking to Army soldiers who are, or Marines who are deployed for well over a year. And there were sometimes 18 months deployment. So,
Mm,
it was a tough period for us, especially when we were non-commissioned officers. So we're married together, dual military, raising now children for the first time.
mm,
And either I'm deployed or he's deployed, and his deployment was really like short tours almost. It was challenging, which is why you have to very quickly, especially, as kind of you start to have family, you've got to build a network and a community around you to help you do this, because you can't do it all on your own. And so our network and our community were the childcare providers who helped us, our neighbors who helped us, and our fellow teammates within our units.
mhm. And I didn't ask you this earlier. Do you have siblings?
I do. I have 4 sisters.
Oh my goodness. And
Yeah.
are any of them military?
They are not military. I'm the
You're
oldest
the one.
of
Okay.
4. Um, I'm sure they'll see this, and I don't feel bad about it. I'll never forget my mom called me one time and said, "You need to encourage your sisters to join the military." And I said, "Oh no." Right? Like they're not military material, and I say that with love. Like
Yes,
the military is not for
it's
everybody,
true.
and I knew that because at the end of the day, while it provides so many opportunities, while it provided me more opportunities than I could ever imagine, it is still a profession of arms.
Yes.
And unless you're willing to sacrifice some of the wants that you have, it
Mhm.
could be tough. And I knew at the time, like my sisters were not military material, like it would be a real challenge. And then they're going to, make all of our family names look bad. So, yes, I have 4 sisters.
So, how many children do you have?
I have 2 children.
Okay, and how old are they, if you don't mind me asking?
So right now, 24 and 18.
Oh my goodness, are either one of them military?
They are not military, so
Is
it
that
breaks my heart.
right?
I'm not quite sure how, with me and my husband both serving as long as we did, how both of our children are not. I suspect some of it is that they saw how hard we worked in our military careers, and that just at the time wasn't what they want to do. But the jury's still out, right? Like they
They're
could
still young.
still at some point join the military, and I think they know that that's always a viable option.
Yes, yes. So in your deployments, how did you communicate with your husband, with your parents, with your children?
Yeah. Well, so way back when I went on deployments in the 90s, and same with my husband. I mean, back then we actually had this thing called a pen and paper, and we
Right.
wrote each other letters. And
Yeah,
so lots of letters,
right,
right? Like a couple letters a week is how we communicated. The other way we communicated is through the telephone. But back then, we didn't have, I'm dating myself, this is crazy, but back then we didn't have cell phones.
right.
And so we had couple telephone booths that our fellow airmen built, and put a telephone in this, kind of constructed plywood booth, if you will. And back then you had to call the base operator, and those were a thing. And so you'd call the base operator from your deployed location, and typically you only had about 10 or 15 minutes. And if you continue talking after that 10 or 15 minutes, you found yourself disconnected.
Yeah,
And that made sense because there were only a couple telephone booths that had DSN lines that could connect you to the States. And you typically had a line of people who were all trying to call their family members.
right.
And so very different. Fast forward into, after 2000, um, communicating with people became a lot easier. So we went from the stages of snail mail,
Right.
paper and pencil and telephone booths, to we started to have USOs set up, and you could go into a USO and make a phone call, or you can do videos and read books to your kiddos. And then they would send a videotape to your kiddos. And then, in my last deployment, you actually had like iPads. And so as
Wow.
long as you could connect to an internet,
Hmm.
you had an ability to communicate. So it's
Right,
it's
right.
gotten
So you
extremely
saw
better.
the real transition
Oh,
from
for sure.
the if you will old school way of doing things, snail
Yeah.
mail, as you said, to basically what we're doing today.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's fascinating. Um, so these the times in which you served, and you mentioned the places that you went, and you mentioned some of the conflicts that we were engaged in, and even some of the after conflict um, uh, duties that you had to do. How did you deal with stress during this time?
Um, i- a couple different ways. I'm a big fan, by the way, Joe, of comprehensive airman fitness. And what that is resiliency strategies, if you will. And I'll never forget, as a young airman, actually being in one of those training sessions where they talked about resiliency, and
Mhm.
they highlighted four pillars. And those four pillars were your physical pillar, your spiritual pillar, your emotional pillar, emotional, mental, and social.
Mm.
And if any one of those pillars were off, then probably your foundation is off and the rest of you is going to be off. And so for me, when it came to stress or difficult situations, I really lean in on those pillars. And so it started to become normal practice for me to actually fill my spiritual pillar,
Mhm.
especially at deployed locations. I always had connective tissue with the chaplain there. So whoever the base chaplain was, or deployed chaplain, I always had connective tissue with the chapel at the deployed location, or even when we were home stationed. Um, I also remember PTing a lot. Physical fitness has, miraculous ways of making stress kind of go away. And so lots of time on the treadmill and working out. And then I would also say the social aspect was really helpful by having teammates around me that I could confide in was extremely helpful and important to be able to get through the next situation. Not only teammates, I don't give my husband enough credit sometimes. He was probably the ultimate teammate because he always gave me really good sound advice,
Mm.
and I tell people all the time, he's a way better NCO than I am, just strong Army principles and leadership. He would help be a good confidant to tell me when I'm right, when I'm wrong, and give me sound advice.
So what kind of challenges did being away from home in those deployments, or even when you were in Germany, but even further in those other deployments, what kind of challenges did that create for you?
Yeah. So when you're deployed, especially if you have a family, I think, deployed for me being single, was really easy, right? I didn't have to worry about anybody but myself. And it was a bit of a reprieve. And all you got to do is focus on work and focus on your PT and just, right, like it's just a lot of you time. Um, when I deployed and having a family, it took on a whole nother level because you miss your family.
Yes.
Especially, for me being a young mom, like I missed being around my kiddos. And so that was certainly tough and challenging to deal with. That also happens when you're at home. So I felt like I certainly had my set of challenges, especially as an NCO living at Ramstein, because for the first time ever, I find myself a non-commissioned officer, which means I'm responsible to more things, not just myself. I'm responsible to the subordinates that I have,
Yeah.
but I'm also a wife. I'm also a mom, and so balancing all that,
Mm.
it was tough. I
Yeah.
remember telling people all the time, as an NCO, you're just trying to survive and not get fired and not
Right.
do anything horrible. And so very challenging time, but needed because it helped me early as an NCO learn the reps and sets to better balance my time as I became a chief.
Right. Right. So you're an E7 or a master sergeant in at Ramstein, and now it's time for you to go somewhere else. Where did you go?
Yep. I can't tell you.
Oh,
No.
okay.
So to some degree I can't. But here's
Okay.
what I'll tell you. Um, I, I'm sitting at Ramstein. I'm the NCOIC of the flight records office there. And remember, I wanted to get reps and sets to become a good leader. And
Yeah.
I get a phone call, and they're like, "Hey, you're going to get an interview telephone call. Like you need to take it." And I actually thought people were playing a joke on me. I'm like, "Is this a joke? Like that's not how people get jobs in the military."
Right.
But it wasn't a joke. Like it was serious. So another unit
Mhm.
somehow got access to my records, wanted to do a telephone interview. That led to an in-person interview at some point, which led to another job. And so I got reassigned to a data mask location.
Mhm.
I was at E7 at the time, a master sergeant, and I'll never forget. So I went into this particular unit. So the whole family PCS is back to the States. I go into this unit as a young E7, and I think I had just pinned on E7. Um, and what I remember from that experience is when you're a senior NCO, people don't care if you have it on for 4 days or 4 years.
Right.
They expect you to know your job. And
Right.
so for the first time ever, I'm here in this pretty high profile special operations data mass assignment. And I feel like at the time I know nothing.
Wow.
Because remember, I came from being an NCO who's just trying to survive
Mhm.
to now here I am. But again, a huge challenge, but such a rewarding opportunity to be in an assignment like that. And I did that for about 5 years, Joseph.
And that's really interesting that you although your job is changing, you're staying at your permanent duty stations a pretty long time.
Yeah. Yeah. Agree. Agree.
And go ahead.
Yeah. Which by all accounts, to your point, a lot of people think you can't get promoted
Hmm.
staying at
That's right.
jobs for long times. But what I've learned is it's what you do in that time period, how your duties and responsibilities tend to change. And again, it's the impact that you make while you're there.
Right. So you were in that job for 5 years, the unmentioned job for five
Yeah.
years. And after that, and now what? Now, had you made senior master
I,
sergeant by this time?
I had made senior master sergeant. And typically, when you make senior master sergeant, even if you're in a special operations assignment, depending on where it is and how many positions they have, but for us, I knew that that was going to mean for PCS.
Right.
So I make senior master sergeant, and I remember at that time it drove another PCS. So I drove the PCS because I got promoted. And because I didn't have enough opportunity in Germany, and because Germany was just a horrible experience, I got the chance to go again. No, it was not horrible. It was amazing. It was amazing. So,
I
so Ron
understand.
and I were so blessed and fortunate that we were able to go to Germany again. So we did
Wow.
5 years there.
Yeah.
In the past, we felt like we didn't see it all. Our kids were young. We were trying to survive. And so we
Yes.
got a second chance to go again. And I
Mm.
PCS there as the flight records chief. So the harm superintendent in the 86 OSS. So very familiar with what's happening at Ramstein, very
Okay.
familiar with the mission of the 86 Airlift Wing, and it felt wonderful.
I was going to say it's almost like going home in a way.
Almost going home. Yes, that my kiddos were a little bit older.
Hmm.
We understood the areas and the neighborhoods.
Yes.
Ron, at the time was still though stationed in different places. Remember,
Right.
not a single army base, that he could go to nearby. So he did a lot of the commuting. We had decided at the time because of my role and responsibility and the girls, we would stay close to Ramstein, and then he commuted about an hour each way
Oh,
for a couple years, and
wow.
that was a toll on him
I'm
to
sure.
do that.
And
But it's a sacrifice that every dual working family has to make,
yes,
and for us, it was worth it.
what now he was still in the army at this time, as you said.
Yeah.
So had he been matching your promotions?
He was, in the army. He has been in the army longer than I was serving in the Air Force. And I'll
Oh,
never forget as a young E4, because I came to Pope, as a young airman. He had already been in the army a year or two. I remember telling him, one day I'm gonna outrank you. And so we were just at the cusp where I started outranking him, and he
I
was
see.
okay with it.
Yes.
Um, what we also learned is life is about choices, and he had to make some deliberate career choices to stay close to the family, right?
Yes.
There's
Okay.
certain choices that all of us can make that look better on a career. For him, he always made a choice to at least keep our family together.
I see.
And we knew that going in, and so I was really appreciative. And again, we both learned balance together, where sometimes he took college classes, sometimes I took college
Yes.
classes, and trying to figure out how to balance the dual military thing.
And so during this time, you bring up a good point about education. During this time, are you going to school? When did you start going to college? Did you finish? What is that?
Yes. So I did. Early in the 90s when I joined the military, I started going to colleges. I kind of went with a couple different colleges originally, and I'd take a class here, and and then I'd be deployed and I'd take a class there. And so I kind of had random, maybe 3 or 4 random colleges and random transcripts.
Right.
And then when I got to Germany, when I was the first time, I started getting serious about college. And so I went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University.
Mhm.
We had office on base, and they consolidated all of my stuff, my military records, plus all the other colleges I
Oh,
did stuff with. And I wasn't too far off from a bachelor's, right?
right.
Like each class will start to, just kind of chip away at that. And so I finished and got my degree with Embry-Riddle. My first tour in Germany, I think it might have been 2005 timeframe. So I got a degree in professional aeronautics.
Oh, okay. And was your husband able to do that too?
He was chipping away at college, but just not as fast as I was able to,
Right.
because remember, he was also at the time the one commuting and so much. And so it was a little bit challenging, but he did do college as well.
And so after after you made senior master sergeant, you're back in Germany. And how long again were you in Germany? The second time?
Um, for 5 years again. So I was senior
You-
master sergeant in Germany. I'm the flight records chief. I take on an additional duty, which is to be the superintendent of the operational support squadron. So two big responsibilities. I make chief master sergeant from that. I fleet up to the ops group. So I'm the 82nd or 86 ops group chief. And then from there, I get selected to become a command chief.
Okay.
And so in 2015, I PCS, I get picked up for a command chief job, and I PCS to Texas, San Angelo, Texas, to be the command chief at Goodfellow Air Force Base.
I see. And what were your duties there as a command chief? What are you doing there?
The care, the advocacy, the leadership for the entire base population. And so Goodfellow Air Force Base, the 17th Training Wing, is really responsible for the training of all of our Intel ISR airmen, as well as all of Department of Defense firefighters. And so it was pretty cool to do my first command chief assignment at a training wing, because I learned a lot. So this was also my first operational assignment in AETC, Air Education Training Command, where I got to learn the importance and the value of deliberate development.
And how long did that last at Goodfellow?
Um, I was a good fellow for 14 months, and I'll
Wow.
never forget, I'll never forget. It came way too fast. So I PCS to Goodfellow, by the way. Ron's still serving in the Army.
Mhm.
Because of my assignment, the Army sends him to Fort Hood, Texas. So there's not a post closer. He's at Fort Hood, Texas. It's a couple-hour drive. For the first time ever, now we're really kind of further apart. So we have now, for the first time, two residences. He's living at Fort Hood, and I'm living in at Goodfellow Air Force Base.
Mhm.
And the girls are with me at the time. And so, we see each other as we can. In a perfect world, we said we see each other every week, but life just isn't perfect, and
Yeah,
you're exhausted sometimes. And so
right.
we saw each other a few times a month. But I'll never forget, I was walking around Sam's Club in San Angelo, Texas, with my daughter, my youngest daughter at the time. And I'll never forget, the phone rings. It's a Saturday, and it's the Chiefs group. And the Chiefs group is the group of folks that call you when you're getting an assignment. And so I thought, why are they calling me on a Saturday? I'm not answering it. And then, and then I was like, I'm going to regret it. So I answered the phone.
Right.
And the Chiefs Group president, or the Chiefs Group chief, tells me that, hey, the chief master in the Air Force at the time, Jim Cody, wants you to go become the chief of PME at the Pentagon. And I thought, the Pentagon, like, I'd only been at Goodfellow for 14 months, and nobody wants to go to the Pentagon. Like, I've avoided the Pentagon, and go be the chief of PME,
Right.
professional military education. Like, what's interesting is that was, 2006, 15, 16 timeframe. If you look in the history records of our Air Force, we were not in a good position, from a professional reputation standpoint on PME. Like PME was kind of a bad name to our airmen because we had just come off of sequestration. We couldn't send our people into in-resident schooling anymore. So we had lots of airmen that were ineligible to promote or reenlist because of PME. So I remember calling my husband up that night and I was like, dude, I was like, I'm about to go to the Pentagon. Like the chief master in the Air Force asked for me by name. And
Right,
I told him, I said, I don't know how he even knows my name.
right,
I think he heard that I was talking bad about PME, right? Like, I don't know. So I'm going to the Pentagon and
right,
I have such a good husband, as I mentioned to you, he reminded me that like, we serve for a higher calling and a higher purpose. And so your next job is to go, because I almost retired.
wow,
I had been in over 20 years and I was like, nobody wants to go to the Pentagon and we can just live in Texas and live our best life. But
right,
because of my husband, I stayed serving. And so there we go. We PCS again. My oldest daughter, this will be her second high school now. Or actually, it was her third high school
oh, wow,
going now to DC. Um, to go be the chief of PME.
right,
And now for the first time, the Army says, hey, we're not sending your husband, right? Like we sent him to be with you in Texas. Like there is no place for him to go. We can't keep, moving him fast. And so I go to the Pentagon by myself with the girls. And for the first time ever, our families kind of separated. So
yeah,
that was really a pivotal point for us too. And ultimately, the one that after a year of being in the DC area by myself and the Army not wanting, and the Air Force not being able to figure out our joint assignments, my husband ended up deciding to retire from the U.S. Army.
mhm,
No regrets. He served honorably for 27 years in the Army.
yes.
And then he became full-time girl dad. And
Oh,
so
that's great.
that provided me the opportunity to serve well.
Yes, and so they're at the Pentagon in DC, chief of PME. Something happened.
Yeah.
You must have done a good job. So what came of that?
Yeah.
What was your accomplishment that then brought the next
Yeah.
huge step, as far as I'm concerned, anyway?
Y- Most people who've served in the Pentagon know that if you can suffer a job in the Pentagon, like that's a great thing because it's an interesting and much needed like animal. Like it is the Pentagon is where all things are made when it comes to all branches of service. And it is, you've got to learn how to navigate the Pentagon. It's where policy is made, it's where decisions are made. And so I stayed in that assignment for 2 full years as a chief of PME. And I learned how to make broad level policy that impacted the entire Air Force, right? And I learned how decision making happened. I learned how to get through bureaucracy. That was probably the 2 year assignment that I learned the most. I learned how to communicate in a way that I never would have learned how to do, where you can talk to our most junior airmen, but yet you can also talk to our most senior 4-star or civilian leader. And so that was really a growth experience for me that had I retired, I really would have missed out on an opportunity.
Yes. And so your accomplishments there obviously uh, drew attention to you to even a higher level. And did so what happened after you were chief of PME?
Yeah. We So lots of good PME changes because, right, as I mentioned
Yes.
to you, I went into the job where PME had a really bad reputation, and we left out of the job where we were able to do some things to help get PME where it needed to be.
Mhm.
And that was because sequestration was over. So we were able to get people back in school. I'll tell you just one funny anecdote if I can share a
Please.
story. At the time, we had a new Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. So we had Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force number 18, Khalith Wright, in the seat, wonderful human being and leader. And I knew him from my time in Germany before. So we had a touch point in Germany. I knew of him. And then when I was the chief of PME, he was going to be the incoming next Chief Master in the Air Force. So before he even got in, I reached out and I was like, hey, we have some opportunities to really make some changes to PME so that it can be better. What I love is he had a lot of trust in us. And so he allowed us to make some really sweeping policy changes. When he got in the seat, we made those policy changes. I'm really simplifying this because it's not easy to make policy changes. Like we're talking about things that took, a lot of work and a lot of getting through a lot of bureaucracy, but I'll never forget, we made one major policy change and we changed PME on the enlisted side. And as soon as we made this change that uncoded 40,000 airmen who were ineligible to promote or re-enlist, immediately overnight on the internet, like we make the policy change, everybody finds out in all over the world really fast. The chief at the time, CMSAF number 18, became enlisted Jesus, like, or immediately, right? Like, and
Wow.
there's
Yeah.
memes about him that he's the enlisted Jesus because
Right.
of these changes. And I remember sending him a note and I said, if you're enlisted Jesus, I must be Mary because I actually did the work. So that was one of the things I was very proud of, is that we were able to move the ball and get after some things as it related to PME. So I did that for the full 2 years in the Pentagon. And then I ended up getting selected to be the 2nd Air Force Command Chief.
I
So
see.
now I'm the 2nd Air Force Command Chief. A trip back to AETC. 2nd Air Force owns really a lot of the training for the majority of our enlisted force in the Air Force. 2nd Air Force owns BMT. It owns the tech training bases and Goodfellow as well. And so
Okay.
it was really fun to kind of go back in a different leadership position and serve with some amazing leaders and help influence how we develop and train America's airmen. And that was another very influential opportunity for me. I did that for 2 years. And so again, going from command chief at Goodfellow to enterprise level PME changes, and then back to 2nd Air Force, where now I'm over kind of training of our Air Force's airmen. And I think that's what really did help give me the perspective that was helpful for at the soon to be Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Brown, to take a bit of notice.
See, and where was where is the 2nd Air Force
It's in
headquarters?
Biloxi, Mississippi, Keesler. So I went
Oh,
back to
okay.
where I went to tech training.
Wow. Talk about full circle.
Yes.
And what did you think about going back to Keesler? I mean, sounds like
It
a
was
good job.
exciting. Yeah, it was an exciting opportunity.
Yeah.
Um, I'll admit, but I was initially a little conflicted because I felt like I wanted to go back to an operational assignment and maybe not one necessarily in the education arena, but it was a natural fit and it was where I needed to be. So we were excited. So we went to Keesler. This is now actually my daughter graduated. So my oldest daughter graduated. Now we're taking our youngest one there. And now my husband's retired. So now we're going in that kind of family dynamic.
Yes. And how did you know that your, for lack of a better term, star was still on the rise and that you had a future beyond 2nd Air Force, or did you know it and you were just doing your duty? Which
No, I think it's probably the latter. I don't know that anybody quite knows it, right? Like, as you're serving in command, chief, command positions, it's kind of like a pyramid, right? And at some point, the opportunities get fewer and far between. And so
right,
when I went to a numbered Air Force, I knew that, well, there's only 10 major commands. Not all of them are going to be coming open in 2 years. So any assignment can be your terminal assignment. And if that happens, that's okay, right? Like the
right.
Air Force has been more than good to us. And so So we went into that assignment like every other assignment, even when I was an
Okay.
NCO, just do your job, do it well, and do great things. And so I was really proud of the work with an amazing Commander, Lieutenant General, well, now Lieutenant General Andrea Tullis. And so we were able to make some significant changes. We were also there at a time when COVID happened.
Oh.
So here we are, it's 2000, COVID happens. I'm on my last year, by the way, of Second Air Force.
Hmm.
I'm on Zillow all the time looking at houses because I'm pretty sure, right? Like I may or may not have a job after this.
Yes.
Summer 2020 will be 2 years for me there. And so COVID happens. I'm proud of our Air Force. We never quit training. We continued BMT. We kept training people during COVID. And then an email came out from the Chiefs group again, looking for um, it went to a select group of folks, and the email was really seeking within this select group of folks. Are you interested in competing for Chief Master in the Air Force? Because you're eligible.
Wow.
And I remember my college kid was home at the time because of COVID, and I remember talking. It was a family discussion for
Yes.
us. Are
Yeah.
we all in?
Right.
What do we say? What should we do? And had my children or husband at the time said, "Hey, it's been an amazing career. We need to pack it up." I totally would have, but I'll never forget my young daughters. My kiddos said, "Mom, you've been serving so long. Why would you be the reason to say no?" Like, right? If you
Wow.
don't get the job, then that's one thing, but don't you be the reason why you don't get the job. And
Yes.
so I sent an email and said, okay, sure. And then the interview process for Chief Master in the Air Force started happening, and the rest is history.
What year was that? Uh,
That was in 2020.
so is that the year you were selected?
Yes.
20,
Yeah.
and how long did you serve as Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force? 4 years?
So I served for about 3.5 years. Yeah.
That's an amazing progression, a career progression. And um, so you served there, and what were some of the events that at that level that you witnessed that would be interesting to people who might watch this? Things that you could discuss, obviously.
Yeah. So many things. One, I can't help but think that if I could become a chief master in the Air Force, kind of this army brat from, graduating Hawaii and troublemaker teenager, right? If I could
Yes.
become chief master in the Air Force, then anything is possible for anybody. I'm really proud of the work that we did when General Brown selected me and we both got into position in August of 2020. I'm extremely proud of the work that we've done. We came into an environment where we were still knee deep in COVID. I know it's hard for
Mhm.
people to remember, but it was interesting times because our nation, the globe, the Air Force, we never got a playbook on here's how to handle everything. And so
Right.
we came in during COVID. We had to learn how to lead our Air Force through COVID, how to make sure that we were strong and respected Air Force through COVID.
Yes.
We had to focus on a lot of things. General Brown, has shared that he hired me because he knew that I knew how to develop the force.
Mm.
And it goes back to the experiences that I had, some
Yes.
very early operational experiences for me and special operations, serving with some of the best Americans we've ever had, to then, understanding the tech training environment, being a command chief there, understanding how to make enterprise level change, and then going down to Second Air Force and understanding kind of enterprise development. So I came in with the aspect of in 2020, we've really got to focus on the development of the force. We're the world's greatest Air Force, not because of the weapon systems that we have, but because of our people. And
Yes.
so, how do we make sure that our people continue to be strong for the next 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years? And so, we knew that we had to raise the strategic IQ. We knew we had to kind of reevaluate what we're teaching in PME. We knew that we had to kind of revamp our training. So, we really did focus on that. And so we focused on kind of the development of the force, if you will. The other thing that I spent quite a bit of time doing that I'm proud of is really building our our relationships with our international partners. We can't do anything by ourselves. And the stronger we make our international partners, the better off we will be as a whole. And so lots of work there, spending time with the chief master sergeants of the air forces from many, many nations to include NATO. And we did some really good work on that front.
It's an amazing career story. It's an amazing trajectory. And as you said, you kind of spoke to a question that I was going to ask is, you know, here you are, this Army brat, and now you're Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. Do you ever get your arms around it and say, wow, I have reached the pinnacle of my, success. Here it is. And I mean, or is it kind of like you can't believe it?
I think all of us as senior leaders kind of come to terms in the way that we do, right? It's still really awe-inspiring and sometimes there's a disbelief. I know that sometimes it's funny. I used to go out and speak at audiences and there's some conferences where there's, 4 to 10,000 people.
Oh my.
For instance, maybe they're waiting on me to come speak, and sometimes I'll peek out from the curtains and I'll stand next to a random airman. I'm like, what's everybody waiting on? And, and they're like, the chief master in the Air Force. And I'm like, ooh, right? Like, who? And so sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect where I'm like,
Yes,
who is it? Right? Like, what are
that's
they going to
right.
say? Is it going to be motivating? Right. So
Right.
so it's sometimes an out of body experience. I'll
Yes.
tell you, you learn to have fun. The people that you surround yourself with are really important. It gets back to that social aspect I talked about. And your kids and your family will keep you humble. I'll never forget one time I mentioned to my oldest that, hey, her high school reached out to me and they wanted me to come and talk and speak. And she's like, you? Like, why? And so I thank goodness that I have family that kept me humble. And
Yeah.
so what it's shown me serving in these positions is senior leaders are just normal people, right? Like
Yes.
with the same challenges and opportunities that anybody else has. And it gets back to the advice that my mom gave me so many years ago: do your job and do it well, whether you're an E4 in the military, or whether you're a chief master in the Air Force, or a chief of staff of the Air Force, or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, like, or the president of the United States. Like, you got to do your job and you got to do it well.
Before we leave the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, speaking of your mother,
Mhm.
what did your parents think?
Oh, they were excited. I'll tell you, when I told them that, hey, it's time for me to like retire, like, I think nobody was more sad than my parents. Like, they my dad, is a retired warrant officer, as I mentioned. He serves at the USO. He was an Army warrant officer, but he has all the Air Force bling because, like, he has, like,
Oh,
I think, a sign that says my daughter is a chief master.
yes.
So everybody, he's just so proud, just
Yes.
as any dad would be, super
Yes.
proud to have a daughter doing this. Same with my mom. I had the opportunity a few times to go out to the base where she's closest to and see her and her coworkers. And she made me come out there as the chief master in the Air Force. And is
Wow.
this young little Korean woman? She still bossed me around and she loves that. So they're just the biggest supporters. And
Yes.
that I tell people all the time, my mom never served, but she did serve in her own way. And
Yes.
so
Right.
any of
Of
us can
course.
serve whether we wear a uniform or not.
Yes, absolutely. Talk to me for a minute about the role that mentorship played in your career.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of mentorship, but what's interesting is when I joined the Air Force in the early 90s, like, we didn't talk about mentoring.
Mhm.
Like, mentoring wasn't a word
Right.
until, maybe the 2000s. And then it was a bit awkward. Like, we had mentorship in the early 90s, and it's just what people did, right? Somebody
Right.
put their arm around you and they mentored you and guided you and coached you and trained you to what's right. And so I had many mentors throughout my career, and most of them never even knew that they were. What I've learned is to get the good
Mhm.
in many different people and then shape who I am.
Mm.
And so, I have had a ton of mentors. They mentored me all in different areas and aspects, whether it was professionally or personally. But it's through watching and learning and not being too proud to ask for help is
Yes.
really the mentors that have helped me.
And was there any one person who stuck out to you as a mentor?
Yeah, for sure, my husband. Yes.
I think
He
that's
he he
great.
did. He
Yeah,
did. I mean, I had lots of mentors, but nobody as close to me than him who knew me better and
right,
could tell me when I was wrong,
right.
who could tell me what to quit doing,
Mm,
um, and to give me just unfiltered advice. I would say him
that's great. And so you retired, when did you say?
in March.
In March.
Yeah.
And what awards or citations did you receive that are particularly meaningful to you?
Yeah. Um, so certainly I received a lot of awards and decorations. I'll be honest, and this might seem cliche, but people can read them in my bios and they're great, but like the awards are not necessarily what gets me excited. The impact in lives is what
Yeah,
really has me excited. So it's the unwritten and unspoken awards that maybe I had an opportunity to help change somebody's trajectory in their career.
yeah,
Those are the things that matter most.
yes, that's a good answer. And what has been your favorite part of serving?
Mm. Two things. One is to be able to do something that has purpose
Mm,
higher than myself. And
yes,
then two, the aspect of being part of the broader military family. Like that has been so very rewarding. You come into the Air Force, and this I'll just tie it back to basic training. You come into basic training, you hear about this concept of Air Force family, military family, and as an eight, you don't quite believe it because you remember your family back home,
right.
but it takes a little bit of time and everybody gets at a different period, but after enough time with your military family, they really do become your family.
Yes.
And that is what makes the time in the Air Force so much richer.
Was there a low point or a lowest point for you, and what did you learn from that?
Ooh, that's a good one, Joe. Um, so I think a couple low points for me was when I mentioned to you that, my husband did a lot of deployments. And so those were tough periods for me personally because I was balancing him being gone, me being a parent, and me trying to balance all the things that I had to do. Those were low points. But what I learned from all that is you've got to rely on your community to
Mhm.
get after it. And I've never had low points. And I think because it's been a matter of mindset, right? Like when you're going through those challenging times, you can either just wallow in some of those real challenges. And I'm not dismissing that they're not real to people because I experienced real, feelings and challenges while my husband was employed. But I learned that it's a matter of mindset too, and that every challenge has an opportunity. What is that? And so that was certainly one of them. The other one was when I was in the position as Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. What's interesting is everybody's like, "Oh, man, leadership is great," right? Like, our leaders have no challenges in the world, right? Like, that is far from true.
Right.
You have more challenges, and
Yes.
when I became a public figure, if you will, that's when I first experienced what people experience when we see things online and in social media. I mean, like, I'm actually a public figure now, so people start knowing immediately about me. The day I got named as the 19th Chief Master in the Air Force, I was still in Biloxi. I'll never forget. My sister calls me up the next day and she's like, "You're in Wikipedia," like it overnight.
Is that like the pinnacle of
I
fame?
I didn't put myself in Wikipedia. I was like, who put me in Wikipedia? And half the information was wrong,
Oh
right?
my
And
goodness.
I'll never forget, my dad calls me up and he's like, can you tell them to fix my rank? I was a warrant officer, not a colonel. And I'm like, Dad, like there's a lot of things going on. And so you become a public figure, which means all of a sudden now you're open to the criticism and you're
Yes.
open to people's anger and hurt.
Yeah.
And so that was such an eye opener, just the level of um, crazy
Mm.
and to some degree disappointment that you might see in this world where you're hearing for the first time women shouldn't be serving and
Oh,
women have no place. Like that was shocking to me. So
right.
certainly a low point, but an opportunity to do
Sure.
my job, do it well, so it's easier for the next person.
Yes. So, what veterans organizations are you involved in presently?
I am involved in quite a few. So by nature of my job, I'll still be part of Air Force Sergeants Association, Air and Space Forces Association. I will still participate as I can with the American Legion, VFW. I have also joined a couple boards that do some work for our veterans, the Mighty Hero Homes board, which is focused on eradicating homeless veterans, and the Robert Irvine board. So, and honorary board member of the Women's Military Memorial.
Right. And what are your plans now in retirement? What are you doing and what do you hope to do?
To enjoy retirement and be there for my children, although they're like, we don't need you there
Yeah.
all the time. So really to give back to my family,
Hmm.
and in the spare time that I have to actually continue the things that I've done for the last 50 years, which is, support our nation's defense, our nation's security, and to help take care of people. So I'll use my voice and my influence to help take care of veterans. I'll
Yes.
talk about the significant need to make sure that we're growing this next generation to be able to replace all of us. And so I'll spend time in national security as well as people.
All right. So we get to some of the more, I don't know, philosophical questions, maybe. Um, if you had it to do all over again, would you do it? And would you do anything differently?
Absolutely. No, I wouldn't do anything different. I mean, I think it's our experiences that help give us, make us who we are.
Hmm. Hmm. And to kind of comment on that, to be able to say that I would do it all over again and I wouldn't do anything differently, that's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, so there's always going to be um there's always going to be aspects to, man, if I could retweak that. I mean, I'm sure I could come up with some things, and some of it might be that
Sure.
maybe I learned balance better, right?
Mhm. Right.
But I learned it and I was able to use my kind of failures in that area to help others
Yes.
like learn from me.
Yes.
And so I would say that no, I don't know that there's a ton that I would have done differently. There's certainly life lessons that I've learned. I probably would have been a better human being, a better team player, a better, person to those around me, but work wise, no.
Mm. And what impact has the service had on your life?
So much. Like the Air Force has afforded me opportunities I never would have
Right.
ever imagined. And I tell people all the time, the Air Force has given me way more than I could ever give it. I've seen the world
Yeah.
through the Air Force. I've met some of the greatest Americans we could have ever had. And I know that we've done our part, whether, Chief Master of the Air Force or whether I got out as a young NCO, I did my part to help make our nation safe and secure. And I'm extremely proud of that.
What advice do you have for young people who are entering the military today?
4 years in the military never hurt anybody.
I love it. I love it. Is there anything that you'd like to add to this interview that we haven't covered?
only that, I said it earlier, for anybody who never thought they could, you certainly can find a place in the United States military. I'm a little particular and biased. I'd love to have you in the Air Force, but the 4 years that you might elect to serve will teach you some great foundational truths. It'll give you some values and work ethic, and you will be better prepared to start your life. And so that's the only thing I might add.
Well, that's wonderful. And Chief, I want to tell you what an honor it has been to do this interview uh, as a staff sergeant with 8 years of service. I never would have thought that I would be talking to a Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, and so it's quite an honor for me. And what a wonderful interview. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Joseph. Thanks for your 8 years of service too. I tell our people
Thank you.
all the time, whether you serve 4 years, 8 years, 28 years, it doesn't matter. Only 1% of our nation serves. And so thank you for 8 years of serving our nation.
It was certainly my honor. Thank you.